Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's been the craziest weather. We didn't know what was going to happen this afternoon. We thought we're either going to be flooded out or stormed out, or it'll be beautiful sunshine. So whether you're joining us from Brisbane, we've got some friends joining us from Brisbane, or you're from the cotton mills next door, and everywhere in between, thanks for coming tonight. We hope you enjoy yourselves and learn some things about the maker community in Melbourne and across Australia and the world. So before we begin, I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're gathered here tonight on the traditional land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We offer our deep respect to their elders past, present and emerging, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples across this country and beyond. So to begin, I'll just start with a quick introduction. My name is Genevieve Callahan and I work here with FAB9. I'm their copywriter, so I sort of write everything from their newsletters to their website content to the articles that we post on our Medium account, which I highly recommend you follow. Just do that little biased promotion for myself there. So I've been a part of the team since March, and since then it's been amazing watching this space develop. We'll be giving you a little sneak peek preview tour of the makerspace on the bottom floor at the end of the night. But it's been amazing to go from talking about FAB9, dreaming about FAB9, having all these ideas about makerspaces, to them actually becoming a real thing. And we will be launching in February next year, so that's a very exciting thing for us. A little bit of housekeeping. I'll just remind everyone to put their phones on silent or turn them off. And also the toilets, if you need them, just down this corridor here and to the right, and you'll see them there. If anyone needs to leave, this building can be a little bit of a rabbit warren, so look for Ying in the sparkly gold skirt and the cool earrings, and Ying will help you out safely and in one piece. Yes, like I said, there's lots of food and drink, so help yourselves. Say hello to friendly Kevin at the bar. He's not just our friendly barman, he's also our procurement specialist for the makerspace. He can sort of do everything, so go say hi to Kevin. I just also want to say a big thank you to Young Henrys for sponsoring us tonight. We always say that we're very tasteful people at FAB9, and so we need to have tasteful drinks for our events. So yeah, we're very grateful to them for sponsoring us. So yeah, help yourselves. Okay, so tonight we're very proud to present an absolutely stellar panel of speakers, and they are makers and making enthusiasts from a diverse range of backgrounds. Each speaker will take the floor one at a time, and between each of them you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. So we'll hopefully get a bit of a discussion happening. Don't be shy. When they're speaking, try to think up your most interesting question and just shout it up at the end when we open the floor. Don't be shy. At the end of the evening, we'll also be taking you on a very exclusive tour of the FAB9 makerspace itself. So you'll be among some of the first people to see the space this close to being finished, and we hope that it'll be as exciting for you as it is for us, because we're so excited about it. Okay, and of course, please network with each other. Use this time to meet your maker community, exchange details, hassle each other, hassle us, ask us lots of questions, and of course, lots of food and drink to help you do that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker for the evening. Targol Khorram is trained in architecture and urban planning, and she's currently working on the Stonington City Council. In 2013, Targol conducted qualitative research at the University of Melbourne on the topic of urban manufacturing, and as part of her master's thesis, this was part of her master's thesis, gaining an in-depth understanding of small makers and small making practices in Melbourne. She leads a placemaking studio at the University of Melbourne, and also recently co-founded Paris Night Market with her brother, which is a startup that activates public spaces in Paris by bringing local makers and the community together. So thank you, Targol.
Hello everyone, very pleased to be here tonight. Thanks Hans and FAB9 for inviting me, and it's glad to be among makers of Melbourne, a topic which was very close to my heart. I worked on it very hard for my master thesis, and I keep trying to be involved with makers. So without wasting too much time, this is like a gathering of the project that we started at Melbourne Uni in 2013, starting to think about who are the makers of Melbourne and what are their characteristics, do they even exist? We didn't know anything about the small makers in Melbourne at that stage. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the background and motivation, why we started this project at all, and then what's happening around the world and what we learned from what's happening around the world, and then the new terms that we learned and we tried to introduce it to Australia, and then the approach that we had to become familiar with makers in Melbourne and who they are, which was the storytelling approach, and the findings of our research. So when we started this study at the first, we knew that there's a lot of industrial land in Melbourne and Melbourne CBD and inner suburbs, but there was a lot of interest from developers to put their hand in those lands and make them to houses, especially because the population is growing in Melbourne. There's a lot of interest in housing, but we also knew that there might be, because we didn't know anything about makers in Melbourne at that stage, that there might be makers or small manufacturers as well who value this space. So we wanted to know who actually uses these industrial lands and who are the people who want to use and who want to keep these industrial lands for themselves. We also wanted to know if manufacturing is in decline, and we wanted to know if we actually need manufacturing in cities, because there's always this negative feeling. As soon as you start talking about manufacturing, people mention pollution and noise and all these things. So we wanted to know if this is actually true, if this is the reason to push makers and manufacturers to other suburbs. We started looking at the changing face of Australian manufacturing to see how it's changing, and we realized that yes, there has been a decline in manufacturing, but at the same time we observed that there has been growth in services, but we couldn't quite link them together at that stage. That's where we started looking at other countries by researching how do they deal with makers who live in the inner cities, what do they know about them. We started looking at different concepts that they discussed in their research, and that's how we became familiar with new terms that we thought maybe we can introduce these new terms in Melbourne and in Australia and see if they actually exist. Do we have such a thing as urban manufacturing in Australia or not? And if we do, if we actually find that we have makers who live in the inner city and work in inner city, do we actually need to save a space for them? Is there an added value for them to be in the city? I mean, what do they get from being in the inner city? What if we push them to other suburbs? What are they going to lose? So these were all the questions that we had. So we started our research by looking at innovation, because we thought that might be the most important thing. As soon as you talk about makers and manufacturers, innovation comes to your mind. So we wanted to know if making and innovation is actually related. One interesting that we found through our research was that almost all of the makers in Melbourne are innovative, but probably 70 to 80% of them, when you ask the direct question that you think you're innovative, they say no. But then when they start talking about the things that they do, the way they're dealing with their customers, they were trying to adopt their product, you actually find that you are. Innovation doesn't exist to the same box of doing something extraordinary. You are actually innovative in the way you're communicating with your customers, the way you are marketing your product. So that was a very interesting outcome from our research. We also had a look at barriers to innovation, and it was the same recurring topic among a lot of makers that we talked with them, that they were talking about finance, labor, and all the other things that kind of stops them to be as innovative as they want to. We decided to go back to our main question, is manufacturing in decline or not? And we realized that when we talk about this topic, in other countries, there are two other topics that people talk about them at the same time. It's new manufacturing and servicization. So we started looking at these two topics. So what is new manufacturing? So there was a lot of discussion saying that manufacturing is actually changing, and there is a different kind of manufacturing that incorporates services to what they kind of provide to the customers. And that's a new kind of manufacturing. It's very different from the old style of manufacturing in big factories that they didn't have much interaction with the customers. They didn't care about putting that extra service when they want to sell a product to the customer. So that's the new kind of manufacturing, which has a different character from the old manufacturing. So we realized that manufacturing is actually transforming. The other thing that we found out was about servicization, and that was about how manufacturers are not only selling the products, but they're also selling the solution to the customers. So it's not just only one thing that they're trying to sell, it's the whole package. They are not only selling a table to you, they are selling the customized table that meets your needs, that fits the things that you like in terms of material, design. So it's not just one simple product. They are trying to redefine themselves to be able to provide a different kind of service to their customers. And from there, we started looking at urban manufacturing, which was a term used mostly in America. And we kind of introduced that term, and we tried to see if characteristics of urban manufacturing can be found in Australia and Melbourne. And those characteristics was that they need an urban location, they're deeply networked, and I would be interested, I mean, we did our study, but I would be interested to ask you guys, do you feel like as makers in Melbourne, you fit into some of these characteristics? Do you feel like you're fairly customized? Do you feel like being in proximity with customers and suppliers is actually important to you? So these are actually the characteristics of urban manufacturers. The next step for us was to find the makers in Melbourne. So who are these people? We started looking at different codes and regulations to see, okay, if you look at manufacturing category, there are different manufacturers, and then at the end, there is this group called other manufacturing, which they actually have the largest percentage of very small manufacturers. And this was the group that we were interested in because we wanted to look at companies that are run by 2, 5, 6 people. So we were interested in this category. So this category was a big unknown. And then in itself, it had 3 different categories. And the last one was again, other manufacturing. So it was like this big mystery of people that existed, but we didn't know who they are. So our main question was, who are they? Who are these other manufacturers? No one talks about them, no one knows if they exist, and that's the challenging part, because if you don't know about a group, you can't actually support them, you can't provide a policy to support them. The first step is to recognize them, and then you can say, this is who they are, this is what they need, and this is how we can support them. Because we didn't know anything about them, we thought that probably the best approach is to have the storytelling approach, which is you don't pretend like you know everything, because you don't. You just go there, try to find people, sit in front of them and let them speak and give you the information so that you can actually understand who they are and what they do. And that was the approach that we chose. And I like that approach because I do believe that there is a story behind an individual maker, and I think that story is what gives extra value to makers. So it was a very pleasant time for me working on this project. With the interviews, we tried to choose different range of makers to cover as much as we can. You may find some familiar logos here of people that have gone and talked with. The findings are very interesting and kind of supporting the idea that these makers would actually fit in the category of new manufacturers and urban manufacturers. The first thing was that, yes, they are service-sized. The things that I have here, they are quotes from the interviews that we had with makers, so these are direct quotes from what they've told us. They saw a lot of value in adding that service to the product that they actually create. And the level of serviceization was different among makers. We can't say that they were all at the same level of providing that service to customers, but it was different. Like, we had a lot of makers who were interested in educating and mentoring other people. There were a lot of makers who were interested in consulting with customers, and they looked at the product, making a product as a journey that it took with the customer, to talk with them, to know them, and then the final product was the outcome of that talking and getting to know the customer. The other thing that we found was that it's actually difficult for the makers themselves to explain exactly what they do, so they wouldn't fit into one category. They were telling us that they do almost everything. They have to be a good accountant, they have to be a good, what did they say? They have to be a good communicator, so there's not just one thing that they have to do. They have to be expert in a lot of things, mainly because of the nature of the small job that they're working. The other finding was that, yes, they are innovative, and the innovation we could see in the spaces that they use to work with each other, how they use and share spaces, how they use and share tools, how they create their own tools. And this is in Footscray. I'm sure the space is familiar for a lot of you. So it was really interesting to see that they create their own tool and a space to be able to, in this case, to be able to provide that educational space for other people. A lot of makers had background, for example, in engineering, and they looked at their final product as a piece of art and engineering together. So it was not just one aspect of work that they were looking at, it was a combination of a lot of different skills that they had, and they created something unique at the end. And this was another question that we asked them, that do you want to grow? Do you want to be able to produce a lot of the same, for example, sculpture or piece of jewelry? And they were saying that it's actually a value that they see in their work, that they can create something that's unique, and they don't want to create 100 of the same thing. So that's the value of their work, that each piece is unique and individual, and that's how would they differentiate themselves from a big manufacturer that produces thousands of the same table or piece of jewelry in 1 hour. Two of the most important things that they brought as challenges was rent, and that the sharing spaces that were not available for them to be able to share resources, which this space is great because I think it's a good response to what makers community wanted in 2013, so it's great to see that this is happening. In terms of rental location, our finding was that, well, a lot of makers, they see a lot of increase in their rent, and it kind of forces them to move the space that they're in into another space, and they didn't like it, mainly because of losing their network, losing their customers, the knowledge sharing group that they were close to. So they were very worried about not being able to continue working in the same space that they've been for the last 20 years. So I would say at the end we found that location was the most important thing that they kept bringing up in every conversation, either in terms of being attached to a location that's also appealing for a lot of developers and other groups to change the usage of that space, or in terms of location of being close to other business partners, customers, suppliers, or in terms of being in a location that they can grow and prosper rather than being in a space that they can't actually collaborate with other people. One other thing that we kind of summarized our study with at the end was about the value that makers bring to a city. So for a city like Melbourne, for example, it's about the small makers that have their own small shops in little alleys or different streets. And when you're walking in the streets, you can have that connection. You can go and see a maker and have a chat with them. So if they don't exist in the city kind of loses its character. And that was our main kind of argument, that these makers, they bring a lot of character to the cities, and each city needs them to build up on their own character. So if we push all of them out of the city, then the city starts losing its character. So that's why there is actually, it is very important to keep a space for makers in the city. And also it's not something that we are making up in Australia, it's a global trend. So in Europe, there are different groups that are working together in terms of creating smaller spaces or collaborative spaces for urban manufacturers. And I was very happy to see people from Brisbane here tonight, for example, because that's what's happening in Europe as well. People, not only in the city, but also from other cities, try to collaborate with each other, try to have influence on policies, try to share what are the good experiences that they have to help each other in improving what they're doing. So it's really good to see there are people from different cities here in Melbourne, and it's good to see the makers community in Melbourne are trying to work with each other, and that's a global trend. That's what we see in Europe, that's what we see in America, and there are a lot of, talking with makers, I'm sure you all know about different trends around the world, about the value that city councils have on what is made in each city, and this is something that I touched base in terms of giving character to places, and these photos are from my recent hobby with my brother. It's the spaces that makers completely transform. Like this one was in a park in Paris, and just by bringing makers, the whole character and activity in that park totally changed. And it was a horrible rainy day, something probably like yesterday in Melbourne. But the number of people who were there, and the makers, and the activities that were happening in the space, it was just amazing. So you can easily see that makers bring character to the city in every space that you put them. They just activate the space. This one is another collaborative space in Paris. We had a market there for, I think it was 48 hours non-stop. And it was just great to see how makers were actually enjoying it more than the people who were coming to that city. So I think all I'm trying to say is that we started this study, we know that makers do exist in Melbourne and they share a lot of characters with other makers in other cities. It's now just about giving them value, recognizing them, and trying to let them grow and prosper. Thank you.
So much. Wonderful. So now we're going to open up the floor to questions, and I'm sure you've all got so many questions. So I don't know, I guess if people want to just put their hand up, and then do we have another mic here, or Kevin? No. All right. We're going to just have to be really patient with each other. I'll run over to you with the microphone, and you can ask a question, and then I'll pass it back to you.
So you talked about how maker spaces can give cities like their own characteristics, right? So in terms of the maker spaces that you have experienced, what do you think makes a maker space stand out the most in a city?
It's a good question, but I think each individual maker, just the fact that they have a story and they have a talent and they're willing to share it with other people, that's just what is going to make that space unique and special. If you're walking in an old city and you find the small shops, you're just curious to go to each one of those shops and see what's happening, who's the person who's actually making that small leather shoes or small bag. So it's about the fact that there is a maker who is there to talk about their talent with you. I think that's what's important, and that's what makes it appealing and interesting for each city, and that's why it's important to keep these spaces in the inner cities. So we need to have a mix of everything in our cities. Housing, yes, definitely. Infrastructure, of course, but also makers.
Surely you're all bursting with questions. Yes, Hans.
Well, thank you for the presentation. Wonderful. So I believe that the project has stage 1 and stage 2. Could you talk more about the project and what's coming next?
Thank you. Stage 1 was the stage that I was involved in. That was really the beginning of the project, to understand who are the makers. I think the next stage was trying to grow our understanding about the makers, looking at different areas of the city specifically, because my study was not specific to one location. I was looking at IMAP area, but also some other locations, to generally get an understanding about makers in Melbourne. I think phase 2 was more looking at detail of each area, like what's happening in Footscray, what's happening in Docklands, how are they different, how are they similar to each other, and then probably to come up with a policy that can influence the future decision making in terms of managing the industrial land in the inner city. That's stage 2. And also I think at some stage we're working on a book. I'm not sure where the book is at the moment, but that's another thing.
Any other questions?
Thank you for doing the study, and especially in Melbourne, and providing us insights. When you met with makers in Melbourne, how did they sort of respond to similar products being available online, and how did it impact their business and their market?
Thank you. Another good question. I think, well, you can't deny that you can always buy anything online, but there is something in that face-to-face interaction that you probably don't have it when you buy something online. Either you're very lucky and you find exactly what you're looking for, or you want to be part of the process of a table that is laid for you. You want to think that this is the table at that day with my partner. We went there, we decided on the type of wood that we want to choose, we decided. I remember I was talking with one of the furniture makers, and he was saying that sometimes they even end up going and see their customer's house to be able to give them advice in terms of what exactly is the best table that they can fit in to their dining room. So I think it's the whole experience that's different from buying products online. Of course, people can make different choices and you can never stop them, but there is always people who want to experience that feeling of being attached to the product that they have in different levels. And I think all the makers were appreciating that there are customers who value that. But also I feel it's part of the education as well. Like, we shouldn't kind of let them be disappeared from our cities. So if you see makers more in the city, you're more encouraged to go and have a chat with them, to maybe buy something from them, because you can see that they're on site, they're making them. You can actually see the value and the time that they spend on creating a small jewelry for you. So that's not something that you can get when you shop online.
Hello, thank you so much for your presentation. Looking at the examples of makers that you showcased, it seems there is some transition from maker, or some fusion of being a maker and being an artist. So how many makers are actually producing products with the function of aesthetics compared to the function of doing something else?
I think that should probably be a stage 3 of our study, because I I really don't know the answer to that question. I could say that with the makers that I met with them, I definitely see an artistic aspect in everything that they've made, but I don't have the statistics of how many of them are actually just functional pieces of work and how many of them are simply sculpture or something that has artistic value. I don't have that number, sorry.
Thank you.
Any more questions for Targol?
Thank you so much, Targol. That was wonderful.